I met Clint after a TED Talk that he gave a few weeks ago. I found the talk incredibly touching. I have young children. They are 13 and 15, and it kind of reminded me again how much we have to go as a country in truly creating an environment where kids could be kids, and we all just had a world in which we were judged by our actions, and where we could aspire to be everything that we wanted to be. I don't think Clint needs a special introduction. He's presented at some of the most amazing stages in the world, including TED. He's a PhD candidate at Harvard, and a winner of the 2014 National Poetry Slam Championship. And I'm sure we're going to have both an amazing talk from him and a great Q&A session that Damien's going to mediate. With that, Clint.
I appreciate it. Thanks so much. How's everybody doing? Great. Come on, you guys work at Google. How's everybody doing? There we go. You should be like, oh, this is awesome. Food is free everywhere. So thank you so much for having me. Like I said, my name is Clint Smith. I'm currently a PhD student at Harvard University. Just finished my first year. I have many more Cambridge winters to go, but it's good to be out in California for a little bit and kind of shake off the blizzards that have just become kind of like immersed in my skin. But I'm really happy to be here. I'm gonna do some poems. So who here has experienced or seen spoken word poetry before? Okay, solid, it's about half. So what we like to say for those of you who have not experienced spoken word, for those of you here, for those of you watching, is that spoken word is not like golf. And so when we say that, we mean traditionally when people think about poetry, they think you sit there and you're just like, And then you go like that, right? No, that's boring, that's whack, that's no fun. We don't want to do that. So can everybody snap? Right, snap, 2 fingers, snap. So if you like something during the poem, you can snap. If you really, really like something, we say you do the delicious chocolate noise, which means you go, like on the top of your mouth, the tongue just like, Everybody go, There we go. And if you really, really like something just, it happens, it blows you away, you're like, oh my gosh, that happened to me, or I felt that way, I've never thought of it that way. We say you do Jesus, but like with a sh. So it's like, Jesus, and you like fall over on the person next to you and you're just like, oh my God. But like, please check with the person next to you before, because like people got like issues with space, and these are your colleagues. There's HR people here, so let's not get into that. But I'm really excited to be here, and so I'm gonna just hop right into it and do some poems, and then we'll have some time for Q&A, which is always my favorite part. And I'll definitely stick around at the end and would love to chat with you guys. So I always like to start with this poem because I think it really represents why I do my work as an educator, why I do my work as a researcher, and why I do my work as a poet. And this idea of speaking into the silences and speaking into the voids that exist in our worlds, and making sure that I'm never complicit in someone else's suffering, that I'm never complicit in violence being exacted on any group of people in any sort of way. And so this is a means of holding myself accountable to the type of person that I try to be for my students, and really pushing myself to ensure that I'm not either, again, being complicit or perpetuating injustice anywhere, in any form, in all of its manifestations. As a kid in a Catholic family in New Orleans, during Lent, I was always taught that the most meaningful thing one could do was to give something up. Sacrifice something you typically indulge in to prove to God you understand his sanctity. I've given up soda, McDonald's, French fries, French kisses, and everything in between. But one year, I gave up speaking. Figured the most valuable thing I could sacrifice was my own voice, but it was like I hadn't realized that I had given that up a long time ago. I spent so much of my life telling people the things they wanted to hear instead of the things they needed to. Told myself I wasn't meant to be anyone's conscience because I still had to figure out being my own, so sometimes I just wouldn't say anything appeasing ignorance with my silence, unaware that validation doesn't need words to endorse its existence. When Christian was beat up for being gay, I put my hands in my pocket and walked with my head down as if I didn't even notice. Couldn't use my locker for weeks because the bolt on the lock reminded me of the one I had put on my lips when the homeless man on the corner looked at me with eyes up, merely searching for an affirmation that he was worth seeing. I was more concerned with touching the screen of my Apple than actually feeding him one. When the woman at the fundraising gala said, "I'm so proud of you. It must be so hard teaching those poor, unintelligent kids," I bit my lip because apparently we needed her money more than my students needed their dignity. We spend so much time listening to the things people are saying that we rarely pay attention to the things they don't. Silence is the residue of fear. It is feeling your flaws, gut-wrench guillotine your tongue. It is the air retreating from your chest because it doesn't feel safe in your lungs. Silence is Rwandan genocide. Silence is Katrina. It is what you hear when there aren't enough body bags left. It is the sound after the noose is already tied. It is charring. It is chains. It is privilege. It is pain. There is no time to pick your battles when your battles have already picked you. I will not let silence wrap itself around my indecision. I will tell Christian that he is a lion, a sanctuary of bravery and brilliance. I will ask that homeless man what his name is and how his day was, because sometimes all people want to be is human. I will tell that woman that my students can talk about transcendentalism like their last name was Thoreau. And just because you watch one episode of The Wire doesn't mean you know anything about my kids. So this year, instead of giving something up, I will live every day as if there were a microphone tucked under my tongue, a stage on the underside of my inhibition. Because who has to have a soapbox when all you've ever needed is your voice? So you can clap after the poem. People always get confused. They're like, oh, yeah. No, you can clap after the poem, snap during the poem. You got it. So that's the warm-up. And so I'm from New Orleans, born and raised, and there's nothing like that place. And I'm a big family guy, right? And like all my family's down. We have some New Orleans people. Baton Rouge, Louisiana. Hey, yeah. There we go. And like, there's nothing like that place. My family means so much to me, and so many of them are still down there. We've rebuilt and sort of reinvented our lives after the storm, which will be a decade coming up. Which I was a senior in high school when that happened, and so it's kind of crazy to think of all that has transpired since then. But like I said, my family is a big part of my life, and my father has had chronic kidney disease for my entire teenage and adult life. And he's had 2 kidney transplants. And 2 years ago, he had his second kidney transplant at Johns Hopkins in Baltimore. And he had some complications with the surgery, and we weren't sure what was going to happen after. And for any of us who've had family members or people that are close to us become deeply sick or deeply ill or even pass away, the idea of being confronted with the mortality of someone that we almost think of as immortal in some sense, especially a parent, is deeply unsettling. And for me, it really forced me to step back and reevaluate and reflect on who this man was in my life and what he meant to me in a way that I never had before. And so this poem is for and about my dad, and really stepping back and trying to figure out who is this man in the context of like my life and who I've become and who I hope to become. And so this is for him. In New Orleans, seafood is as much a part of life as changing tides. I was raised between shrimp etouffee and fried catfish. Learned to walk on crab legs and was baptized in a pot of crawfish before I even knew what one was. Still, I was always disgusted by the oysters. But see, my dad loved them. He said that the zinc in the meat was good for your hair, and that if I had seen the hairlines on the men on my mama's side of the family, I better start eating up. I would later learn that an oyster's pearls were formed from foreign parasites that had breached the boundaries of its shell. To protect itself from the danger, the oyster cocoons the substance in coats of calcium until the very thing that was trying to destroy it becomes the thing that makes it most beautiful. Mother Nature has a funny way of teaching us. See, last summer while visiting home, I went to check on my dad to see if he knew the score of the game, but when I opened the door to his bedroom, I saw him laying on the ground like a broken promise, genuflecting in front of a prayer. My father held his stomach as if he had been stabbed by the very person entrusted to protect him. Betrayal has never been so silent There is no treason like that of your own body turning against itself. A Benedict Arnold with a bayonet in your bloodstream. A Judas kissing your kidneys goodbye for 30 pieces of silver. See, chronic kidney disease is deep sea diving with no oxygen, drowning underwater, waiting for a transplant to bring you back to the surface. But my father is an oyster, wears a shell hardened by growing up in a place where expectations never rose above low tide, has a coral reef of a mother with the echo of an unborn ocean on her breath, taught him that when the waves of this world try to wear you down, it's okay. We are all just a little bit weathered, and she has taught me that if an oyster can turn a parasite into a pearl, then it is no surprise that my father can turn a kidney into calligraphy. See, when I was 14 and he was first diagnosed, he wrote me a 15-page letter saying that if anything happened, I had to be ready to become the man of the house. He wrote, Clint, though it hasn't always looked like it, I've always put God first. I know you complain because Clinton Ward Smith III makes it sound like you're the heir to a British monarchy, but never doubt you are a king. Understand that I gave you your grandfather's name because the most sacred things I have ever known come in trinities. Clint, love your mother like a stained glass window in a war zone. She can be both shield and shard, both weapon and protection. Treat every woman like you would want a man to treat your sister. This ocean already has enough sharks. Clint, don't be another shark. My father is an oyster. Clasped down tightly on the things he loves the most, his family and his God. He has a calcium-encrusted heart cradled tightly in his chest. Bears scars worn from waves that have tried to erode him of this world. My father is an oyster. And I pray that when he is pulled from this ocean, that those who live above the surface will see the brilliance of his pearls. And so my father is to provide context, is a lovely, wonderful, wonderful man. I'm from the South, and he's very much like prototypical, like strong, silent type. My mom was always the like coochie coochie coo, I love you, mwah, 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 right? And so I would like score a goal or like, do well in a track meet or like get an A on a test. And my mom would come hug me and she'd be like, oh, I'm so proud of you. You're so wonderful. You're amazing. Blah, 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 mwah, 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 coochie coochie coo. And Dad would come up to me and he'd walk behind me and be like, good job, boy. And he'd like slap me on the butt. I'm like, all right, that's cool. You can tell me you love me too. I love you, Dad. But it was like, okay, cool. And so we were in the hospital and I did that poem, and I've been blessed to perform on many stages in many places across the world. But I feel like the most important reading of a poem I ever did was for my mom, my dad, my younger brother, my younger sister, of this poem that I had written on Christmas Eve of that night, and 2 years ago. And I did the poem, and my mom came up and she was like super weepy-eyed, and she came and hugged me, coochie coochie coo, I love you, mwah, 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 you're so amazing. And my dad is like in his hospital robe, and he kind of like got out of bed, he walked over to me, and he looked at me, and he was like, good job, boy. And I was like, oh, Dad, come on, man. I just poured my heart out for you. But no, and what it's done though is very much allowed us to like recalibrate our own relationship, right? And like, it's helped me and him, I think, push back against our own socialized, preconceived notions of how men are supposed to show love and affection for one another, right? So like I tell my father I love him all the time. When we're on the phone, he does the same. And it's unfortunate that it will take something like that sometimes to do that. But I think it's been a huge lesson for each of us, and I'm so grateful that I could learn that lesson without having to lose him, and then sort of transfer that into all the other relationships I have in my life. Because we have examples every day of how precious life is, and growing up, my parents knew that, and especially in the context of this past year and all that has transpired with regard to unarmed black men and women being killed by police and vigilante. In a way that is not necessarily new. It is only new in the context of that we live in a sort of hyper-documented era in which everyone has camera phones. And these are things that black people have been saying have been happening for a long time. But now everybody has an iPhone or an Android, and it's brought to the forefront of our attention in a way that it hasn't before. And so my parents were acutely aware of this growing up. And I think for them, it was always a wrestling of how do you reconcile the tension between, wanting your child to be a child and to like run around and play and be curious and make mistakes. Also knowing that the way I had to navigate the world was drastically different than my white friends, and that we couldn't do the same things. We couldn't act the same because they had very different implications. And I've been thinking a lot about this year, this sort of pedagogy of Black parenting, and like what it means to raise a child in a world that is often taught to fear them. And so I had the privilege of speaking at TED a few weeks ago, and TED's a crazy experience because you have the like virtual reality corner over there, the like 3D printing corner over there. Al Gore is like hanging out at the salad bar. It's just like a crazy. Bill Gates is like walking around and in a bowler suit. It's wild. And I was afforded the opportunity to present there. And for me, I was like, well, if I'm going to go speak at TED, a place that very much represents a sort of different stratosphere of wealth and power and influence, I want to bring a message that I'm not sure would otherwise be there. And I want to ensure that people understand. I don't want people to not know that this exists, right? I think there are people who decide to purposefully not engage and to ignore things, but I kind of wanted to bring at least a part of what this broader Black Lives Matter movement is about to the forefront of people's attention who might not be receiving that message in other ways. And so I presented and I was immensely thankful for the opportunity. And it's out in the world now, and this is it. One night when I was 12 years old, on an overnight field trip to another city, my friends and I bought super soakers and turned the hotel parking lot into our own water-filled battle zone. We hid behind cars, running through the darkness that lay between the streetlights. Boundless laughter ubiquitous across the pavement. But within 10 minutes, my father came outside, grabbed me by my forearm, and led me into our room with an unfamiliar grip. Before I could say anything, tell him how foolish he made me look in front of my friends, he derided me for being so naive. Looked me in the eye, fear consuming his face. It said, "Son, I'm sorry, but you can't act the same as your white friends. You can't pretend to shoot guns. You can't run around in the dark. You can't hide behind anything other than your own teeth." I know now how scared he must have been, how easily I could have fallen into the empty of the night, that some man would mistake this water for a good reason to wash all of this away. These are the sorts of messages I've been inundated with my entire life. Always keep your hands where they can see them. Don't move too quickly. Take off your hood when the sun goes down. My parents raised me and my siblings in an armor of advice, an ocean of alarm bells so someone wouldn't steal the breath from our lungs, so that they wouldn't make a memory of this skin, so that we could be kids, not casket or concrete. And it's not because they thought it would make us better than anyone else. It's simply because they wanted to keep us alive. All of my Black friends were raised with the same message, the talk, given to us when we became old enough to be mistaken for a nail ready to be hammered to the ground, when people made our melanin synonymous with something to be feared. But what does it do to a child to grow up knowing that you cannot simply be a child, that the whims of adolescence are too dangerous for your breath, that you cannot simply be curious, that you are not afforded the luxury of making a mistake, that someone's implicit bias might be the reason you don't wake up in the morning? But this cannot be what defines us. Because we have parents who raised us to understand that our bodies weren't meant for the backside of a bullet, but for flying kites and jumping rope and laughing until our stomachs burst. We had teachers who taught us how to raise our hands in class and not just to signal surrender, and that the only thing we should give up is the idea that we aren't worthy of this world. So when we say that Black lives matter, it's not because others don't. It's simply because we must affirm that we are worthy of existing without fear, when there are so many things that tell us we are not. I want to live in a world where my son will not be presumed guilty the moment he is born, where a toy in his hand isn't mistaken for anything other than a toy. And I refuse to accept that we can't build this world into something new, some place where a child's name doesn't have to be written on a t-shirt or a tombstone, where the value of someone's life isn't determined by anything other than the fact that they had lungs, a place where every single one of us can breathe. And so I care deeply about these issues of racial and social justice. And I think for me, as an educator, I'm deeply invested in ensuring that we have honest conversations moving forward about what racial justice is and looks like. And I think that's the thing that happens in the corporate world, in academia, and in nonprofits, where everyone's talking about diversity, diversity conversations. We all just need to have conversation, and we can be kind of inundated with that language to the point where it becomes like meaningless. Like, what are we actually saying? We need to have a conversation. What does diversity actually mean? Become like a world of euphemisms. And for me, I deeply believe that we can't have an honest conversation about race moving forward unless we're being honest about the socio-historical context of race in this country at large over the last like 300-400 years. And so for me as an educator, I'm really interested in this idea of revisionist history and like pushing back against this sort of myopic view of what our country is, what our country has done, specifically to marginalized communities, and thinking of like when we read our American history textbooks, what voices are we hearing and what voices aren't we? Like, how are certain people being portrayed and how are others being portrayed? Or like, how are certain social phenomena or legislative phenomena being conveyed as successes when they were only successes for certain groups of people, and like were specifically created to be unsuccessful for other groups of people. And so I think a lot about that, and a lot of my research is around how that happens as a grad student. And so a few months ago, I spent some time reading Thomas Jefferson's memoir, Notes on the State of Virginia. And in it, he says very explicitly that the slave is incapable of love. And black people are inherently inferior to white people. The slave is incapable of love. The slave is incapable of possessing and sustaining complex emotion. And so what does that mean? Like, for the person who was largely the intellectual founding father of this country, responsible for, in large part, the conception of the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, to have not thought that I was fully human, to have not thought that like I could love my mother or my father or my sister or my partner or art, that I could have passions, that I was inherently incapable of those things. And when we think about that, how does that fit perfectly into the sort of narrative arc of this country's history of like dehumanizing black and brown bodies? Like, this is a new thing, right? And I think that's my point, is that a lot of people were inundated with the Mike Browns and the Eric Gardners and the Walter Scotts and the far too many names. And people were like, where did this come from? Why did police just start killing black people? It's actually like there has been state-sanctioned dehumanization and violence against black people since the inception of this country. And so again, I think if we're going to move forward and have a conversation about how we eradicate state-sanctioned violence against black people, we have to have a conversation about the state-sanctioned violence that has happened against black people for centuries and centuries. And I'm interested in making sure that we're representing and giving a sort of holistic account of our history and of the different players in our history. And so this poem is about some of our founding fathers and trying to give a more fully representative account of their transgressions, so to speak. Letter to 5 of the presidents who owned slaves while they were in office. George Washington, when you won the revolution, how many of your soldiers did you send from the battlefield to the cotton field? How many had to trade in their rifles for plows? Can you blame the slaves that ran away to fight for the British because at least the redcoats were honest about their oppression? Thomas Jefferson, when you told Sally Hemings that you would free her children if she remained your mistress, did you think there was honor in your ultimatum? Did you think we wouldn't be able to recognize the assault in your signature? Does raping your slave, when you disguise it as bribery, make it less of a crime? When you wrote the Declaration of Independence, do you ever intend for black people to have freedom over their bodies? James Madison. When you wrote to Congress that black people should count as 3/5 of a person, how long did you have to look at your slaves to figure out the math? Was it easy to chop them up? Do you think they'd be happy being more than just half human? James Monroe. When you proposed sending slaves back to Africa, did black bodies feel like rented tools? When you branded them, did the scar on their chest include an expiration date? When you named the country Liberia, were you trying to be ironic? Does this really count as liberation? Andrew Jackson, was the Trail of Tears not enough for you? Was killing Cherokee, Choctaw, Creek, Seminoles not enough to quench your imperialism? How many brown bodies do you have to bulldoze before you can call it progress, Mr. Washington, Jefferson, Madison, Monroe, Jackson? When you put your hand on the Bible and swore to protect this country, let's be honest in who you were talking about. When the first Independence Day fireworks set the sky aflame, don't forget where we were watching from. So when you remember Jefferson's genius, don't forget the slaves who built the bookshelves in his library. When you remember Jackson's victories in war, don't forget what he was fighting to preserve. When you sing that this country was founded on freedom, don't forget the duet of shackles dragging against the ground my entire life. I'd been taught how perfect this country was. But no one ever told me about the pages torn out of my textbooks, how black and brown bodies have been bludgeoned for 3 centuries and find no place in the curriculum. Oppression doesn't disappear just because you decided not to teach us that chapter. If you only hear one side of the story, at some point you have to question who the writer is. All right. Thank you. I appreciate you guys. I'm doing one more poem, and then hopefully we'll have some time for questions. And so I do a lot of poems about, ostensibly like heavy subject matters. I talk a lot about race and class and gender and all these different facets of identity, and I often do it in the context of my students. And I talk about my students and the communities they come from and their families, just wonderful, wonderful people. And I want to always be clear that we, in discussing these issues and thinking about the sort of contemporary realities that exist in the context of race and class and our history, it's important not to conflate the sort of structural realities with people themselves, right? And so I think oftentimes even well-intentioned people will go in and say, oh, we have to fix these communities, which is really them thinking that we have to fix the people in these communities, which is misguided because the people, and there's nothing wrong with people. There's nothing wrong with people in communities we're seeking to serve. It's that they've been subjected to, again, state-sanctioned violence in both a metaphorical and quite literal sort of way, and that they're existing in structurally deficient communities that we have failed to serve adequately for many, many years. And so I'm always careful in making sure that we're using language that's asset-based and rather than deficit-based. And that, when we're talking about students, for example, we're not saying, when we say something is wrong with the school, we're not actually saying the children in the school or the teachers themselves, because we can't look at any of these things in isolation. We can't think about education without also thinking about mass incarceration, without also thinking about housing discrimination, without also thinking about immigration policy. All of these things are deeply, deeply connected. And so this poem is a way to remind myself that the young people I work with are brilliant and amazing and wonderful. And it's everything around them that we need to work in partnership with them to fix instead of this idea of fixing them. When the world thinks about my students, too often they see caricatures of pity, metaphors of misery that can do nothing for themselves. But every day I see resilience. I see boys and girls turn into young men and women right in front of my face. I see students who walk to school on street corners where policemen can make them feel more terror than talent, but they still show up for tutoring at 6:30 in the morning. So often we focus so much on the quicksand that we fail to see what has refused to drown. So when you think about my kids, don't just think about what holds them down. Think about how they overcome it every day. Think of Janiyah, who turns my classroom into a coliseum. Every word she speaks coded in creativity, her poetry would have brought Homer to his feet. Think of Anna, who became an honor roll student when the world wanted to free and reduce lunch to define her. She is more than a form. She is more than a number. Think of Chris, who has been working every day since he was 13. That money helps his mother keep the lights on so that their world isn't covered in darkness. My students have turned my classroom into a symphony of second chances. Every day we write to right the wrongs that have been done to communities that never had a choice. We read to learn how to tell our own stories because no one can define who we are if we are the ones holding the dictionary. So don't tell me my kids aren't brilliant. Don't tell me that they aren't walking miracle. My students have taught me how to relearn every part of me. I carry their stories like a back pocket full of prayer, and I leave my classroom a better person every day. So when we speak of them, let us speak of humanity. Let us speak of perseverance. Let us speak of how funny they are. Let us speak of how courageous they are. Let us not focus so much on the shadow that we fail to see what stands above it. Let us celebrate the best of our kids, as we would want anybody to celebrate the best of us. Thank you, guys.
Hi to everybody in the room. Hi, everybody who's joining via live stream. My name is Damian Hooper Campbell, proud member of of Google's Black Googler Network, and also a member of the diversity team here. So I'm going to be quick because I really want to hand the remote control back over to you all in the audience. I think your questions are probably better than mine. But I want to ask you a couple of quick questions, and then we'll pass it over. So the first one is, when did this happen?
Yeah.
Right? Like you're a very talented brother, but when did you just know I got this talent? And like bring us back to that moment. How did this all happen for you?
So I've always loved reading and writing. I was a strange, big-headed child. And so when I was in third grade, we had our third grade yearbook, and everybody could say, like, what did you want to be when you grow up? And so most, 8 years old, most third graders said, I want to be an astronaut or a fireman or a ballerina or a football star. And mine was like, I want to be a Newbery Award-winning author. I was so lame, but it was but I always loved just like reading and writing were directly associated with this notion of discovery. My parents, had these encyclopedias that they kept in our house, and if I ever had a question, my mom would say, look it up, right? And so I was always just a deeply curious kid, and learned that, spending time with words was how I could figure out how I would navigate the world. But I also played sports my whole life, and I ended up getting a soccer scholarship to college, but I didn't play a lot in college. And so I kind of had this like 19-year-old existential crisis where this thing that had largely, been the way I was identified my entire life, I wasn't good at anymore. I was sitting on the bench, I would later learn that, I should have known because New Orleans isn't necessarily a hotbed of soccer talent to compare yourself to. But yeah, and so then I had an internship in New York City, and I went to a place called the Nuyorican Poetry Cafe, Lower East Side of Manhattan, and it changed my life. I mean, I had never experienced art in that way. So the Nuyorican Poetry Cafe is a small poetry spot on the Lower East Side, but it's like the mecca of spoken word, like well known throughout the country and the world. And the first poem I ever heard was a woman who did a poem about having cerebral palsy. And disability wasn't something that was ever necessarily at the forefront of my consciousness. But in 3 minutes, the way I thought about an entire demographic of people like completely changed. And to me, that was remarkable. Like someone could get on stage and tell their story, and I enter a room thinking about the world one way and leave that same room thinking about the world completely differently. And I was like, I don't know what this is, but I'm gonna do it. And like, it's not I'm like a pretty awkward dude. Like I was never the kid who was like excited to share in class. Right. I was like a fairly quiet kid. And so the idea of like standing in front of a group of strangers and like being vulnerable was unsettling, but I knew the end product and what it could do and what art at its best could do in that form. And yeah, so I was fortunate to go to Davidson College, a small liberal arts college. Steph Curry was my classmate. Shout out to Steph, I see you. Liberal arts colleges, it's like all about the journey and not the destination. They're like, I came back and I was like, guys, I want to be a spoken word poet. And they were like, okay, Clint, right? I was like, you write your poems. But I just worked on it, and I decided it was something I really wanted to be great at. I became an English major. I just took every opportunity I could to go to Charlotte and like spend time in the open mic community, and just decided this was like something I wanted to be a part of my life, and I could have never anticipated that it would become what it's become, but I'm very grateful.
Yeah, no, we are very grateful that you visited, the Nuyorican Cafe and the whole nine, because you were very good at it. You brought me back to the movie Love Jones for a while. Okay. So,
need along though.
All right, so kind of you touched on a little bit, right, about impact and influence at Google. Shout out to Google a little bit. On the diversity team, we talk a lot about expanding the pool of technologists, right? We look in, we say, well, we only have 2% of our workforce in the United States at Google is Black and 3% are Hispanic. And then if you really start to, distill that by who are in tech roles and non-tech roles, the number becomes even crazier. And we know technology is running everything right now and for the foreseeable future. You're on the ground though, brother. You're there with students every single day. So you think about impact. How does the tech world connect with the students who are in Baltimore, who are in Ferguson, and help them to get excited about this the same way that you get them excited about spoken word, et cetera? How do we impact? How do we influence?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I think, I think of myself. I've never been a tech person, but like I said, I always loved writing. But growing up, I didn't see a lot of black male writers. I didn't really know many. I wasn't exposed to many growing up. And there was one main writer, Walter Dean Myers, who was like he wrote a lot of books with young black male protagonists. And if it wasn't for him, I don't know that I would have ever been able to envision myself as a writer. And I've never had the pleasure of meeting him. He passed away last year, but I wish I could tell him how deeply he impacted my life. And I think it's because I was able to see myself, someone who looked like me, in a role that, either implicitly or directly I was told wasn't for me. Right? This idea, like, when I say I want to be a writer, it's in some ways almost the same as like saying I want to be a basketball player. I want to be a football. Like, people are like, oh well, okay, that's not something that is seen as attainable in some sorts. But because I had an image of someone who was doing it well, and who I could see myself in, it was just hugely important in a way that I'm only really beginning to understand. And so I think with regard to tech, I imagine that it's the same. I taught high school, and a lot of kids are deeply imaginative individials, but they're also human, right? And so if you don't see someone who looks like you, or both, if you don't see someone who looks like you or are not told ever that this is something you can or should do, then you don't even know that that's something you should reach for, right? If all you know of Google is a bunch of people who don't have brown faces, then you don't ever envision yourself working at Google. And so I think part of what, and I imagine hopefully you all are doing something like this before, but I mean, I just like literally putting people who look like so many of our kids in front of our kids, and saying like, you can do this, like you can, I've done it. And even if it's different lived experiences, right? Because Black people are a very heterogeneous community, and like we all come from various backgrounds and experiences, but just the simple act of being able to like if you came in my classroom and I looked at you, I was like, okay, I could work at Google, right? I might not tell you that because I'm a stubborn 14-year-old and I'm like, man, whatever, like I ain't got the time. But that's what I would feel, right? And so I think it's really just about showing young folks that like you belong here, right? And then making them feel like they belong here once they get here.
Cool, thank you. Last question, then we'll turn it over to you all in the audience. Spent some time watching your TED Talks this weekend, and I literally was ironing while I was watching one, and I put it on for 3 times because it was so powerful and I didn't want to miss anything. And, we do good work here, at least I feel like we do, and I felt inspired. But I guess there was one part where you said, on the one about silence, where you said you talked about spending so much of your life telling people what they wanted to hear versus what they needed to hear. You look out into the audience, there are brilliant minds here, Black minds, white minds, Hispanic minds, just everything. You have a captive audience here. What do we actually need to hear as members of Google, and how we can kind of create impact to address many of the problems that you talk about?
Yeah, the first is to recognize the immense leverage that an organization like Google, Google is one of the most powerful organizations in the world. I was having a conversation with some folks earlier, and they said, as soon as you tell someone I work at Google, then almost the way they interact with you like completely changes, right? And so there's power there. And so I think it goes back to recognizing there's a level of influence, both as an individual who represents this organization and the organization holistically. And touching back on what I said before, like making sure we're like having honest conversations, right? I think it's so important for every single person to be an ambassador of racial justice, right? And I think it's so, we all, once we leave here, once we leave Google, like all exist and navigate and exist in like these different communities, and some of which have these conversations a lot, some of which never have these conversations. And it's I think for so long, I was always scared of like making people feel uncomfortable, or I'm taught to like tiptoe around just to like not ruffle feathers. but you know, I had to sit back and say, like, in doing so, am I only, you know, perpetuating this status quo that is like that's unacceptable, right? A status quo that is like very, you know, helpful to certain groups of people and very dangerous for others. And how can I engage in this conversation in a way that's not going to immediately put someone on the defensive, but is also going to, you know, leaves them unsettled, right? Because these are unsettling issues. I don't want somebody to sit there after my, you know, my TED Talk poem and just feel good. You shouldn't feel good. Like, this is not, the stuff that's happening is not okay. So I think, you know, we all have to get it out of our brains that, like, this should be a comfortable or safe conversation, right? We say we want to create safe space and want people to be comfortable, but like, what do we really mean when we're saying comfort, and who are we talking about being comfortable and who are we talking about not being comfortable? And so, yeah, I think stepping out of this idea that these conversations shouldn't be unsettling, because I think they should, but at the same time, having a level of empathy to say, like, let's meet somebody where they're at, because otherwise we're not going to move this conversation forward at all. And I think that conversation, you know, clearly should be happening internally, but also that, you know, some of you might like have more. This is a hugely diverse room, right? And so many of you might interact with people of different backgrounds in a way here at Google that you don't in your life once you leave here, and with people who don't have the same opportunity to engage with people from such different backgrounds. And I think that's a certain level of capital that you should bring to sort of like dispel caricatures and stereotypes and pathologies, and ensure that you're speaking up in a way that if your coworker was, you know, standing right next to you when somebody said something negative about their community, that they would expect you to speak up for them in a way you'd want them to speak up for you.
Love it, love it. Thank you for answering those questions.
Yeah.
Now I want to turn it over to the audience to see if anybody else has questions.
Thank you so much. I really enjoyed your presentation. My question is, you talked about reactions, people's reactions to what you do and the work that you bring about. What have been your experiences? How do people react, especially when you're in audiences that maybe it's a little uncomfortable for them to hear this? What have been those reactions from some of those kind of top tier people?
Yeah, I think, I mean, they certainly span the spectrum. But for example, at TED, after I did that poem, I had a lot of folks come up after me, you know, kind of in tears or like really emotional, and they were like, I could never imagine having to have that conversation with my child. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry. And I don't want them to, you know, apologize to me necessarily, but I think there is a real gap in terms of like just an understanding of how certain people navigate the world as compared to your own life. And that, you know, for me, it was very much like, I'm not trying to get up here and accuse anyone of anything. I don't think that's necessarily productive, as much as it's like, this is something that is real in my life. And I'm always ensuring that I'm speaking specifically from my own life, because I can't speak for other people, but I know that this is an experience that's similar for a lot of people that I grew up with, a lot of people that I know. And very much saying like, you know, it's having it be something that someone can't sweep aside, because this is real and it's personal and it's grounded in, you know, a very real lived experience that I had. And you know, as an audience member, I want you to understand that and grapple with and think of like, you know, how does that manifest itself in your life? Have you seen something like this? Have you, when you are with you know, a colleague or a coworker or a friend of a different race, do you ever think about how they might have to like interact with people and navigate the world in a different way than you do? And like, do you ever, are you cognizant of that in sort of everyday, you know, situations? And so really just trying to like plant this idea in their mind, and ensure that it's not something that they can necessarily be naive of or ignore. And so most people are very positive, you know, give me very positive reactions and say, like, thank you so much, I have no idea. Some people, you know, the internet's full of trolls, right? And so be like, Clint Smith hates white people. And I was like, all right, guys, like, that's not true, my best friend is white. And I was like, no. But, don't ever say that, because that's no, but I'm thankful that people listen. And the thing about art is that once you put it out in the world, I have no control over how someone's going to hear it, right? They're like, however many people in this room, I'm sure that everybody got something different from some of the poems that I did. And that's kind of just comes with the territory. But I just know that I want to put something out into the world that's honest and that's real and that will hopefully be thought-provoking in some regard.
Sorry, I'm taking a ping question now from Erin Moss. She wants to know, what is your take on activism in 2015? Is social media the answer? Or from your research and experience, do you believe it takes much more?
I think what something like social media, like Twitter and Facebook have done is really democratized this idea of what activism is and looks like, and it's decentralized who can engage and who can't engage in activism. I think there's a lot of, people kind of try to rag on hashtag activism, so to speak, or online activism is this armchair activism where you don't necessarily have to invest anything personally into it. You can just like click or post, but I would argue that everything that has transpired with regard to like the Department of Justice going down to Ferguson, with regard to the new police task force from the White House that just came out today that is dramatically like demilitarized the police from a federal level. All of these things in many ways manifested themselves from protests that were organized via online and social media spaces. And I think, for me, I go to one of the best, I'm fortunate to go to one of the best schools in the world, and I'm, deeply grateful and learn so much every day, but I probably learn just as much, if not more, from my Twitter timeline as I do in my classes, right? I mean, there's so many smart people who are creating knowledge and facilitating ideas and engaging with one another in a constant 24/7 sort of way. And so additionally, what it's also done is really decouple this idea of what it means to be well educated as compared to well schooled, right? And so often in social movements, we feel like it has to be, someone who has a PhD or someone who went to this certain school or someone who, dresses this way or who has this sort of education. And it's like, no, actually, anyone who has something to say can say it and can engage with, you get on Twitter and you see professors at Ivy League schools engaging with activists in Ferguson and coordinating and supporting one another and affirming one another. So I think all that to say, I think it's hugely, hugely important. I don't think it in and of itself is an end, but I think it has really opened up the space in terms of who has the ability to engage in this sort of movement building work, which takes all of us, right? It can't be just a few people. I think we have this kind of ahistorical misconception around how the civil rights movement actually went down. We're like, oh, it's, Rosa Parks sat down on the bus, and then they went on a march, and Martin Luther King had a dream, and then everybody could vote, and it was great, right? It turns into this week-long festival, and that's not how it was, right? It was a lot of people who, beyond Dr. King, beyond SNCC, beyond these individuals and organizations that we kind of lift up, who were engaging every single day for a very long time.
I picked the wrong spot to sit and ask a question. So I've been dealing with this stuff for a long time, obviously from a very different vantage point than you. Is there any reason to hope? And that's not supposed to be a yes or no question, it's just an answer, rather.
I think, no, I think it's an important question to grapple with. I think, I'm someone who while there are certainly problems that exist, that have existed in this country for a long time and continue to exist in sort of different manifestations of themselves, as racism, right? Racism still exists and is very pronounced in our society. It doesn't look like it did in 1965. It doesn't look like it did in 1905, 1865, but it still exists. But even amid that, we would be misguided if we didn't recognize that there have been immense strides made, and that that for a long time people could have, if you told someone not so long ago that this group of people would be sitting in this room at one of the most powerful companies in the world, they would have, laughed you out of the room. And so I think that we have, while we know, and we cannot ever think that the problems of the past have simply been swept away or are gone, we also know that like things have gotten better, and that they can, and that they will continue to, and that there are people who have committed their lives to this work, and who have, like, in the past, and who are doing so now, and who will continue to. And I just think hope is, I mean, if you don't have hope, I don't know what else you have. Every day I wake up hopeful. I deeply believe that we can, like, build a new world, that we have, and that we will continue to. It's going to take a lot of work. It's going to take probably a lot of time, because we are pushing back against, centuries of pathology and deep hatred and violence that has been exacted against a lot of people, and clearly exist in its own form again today. So yeah, I'm not someone who believes that the U.S. is doomed, or that we will, like, we are destined for never, moving beyond the sort of socially stratified place that we exist now. I just think the work that has to be done now is to make sure that every single person is invested in that, right? That we can't afford to have people on the sidelines. We can't afford to have it so that people are saying, like, oh, well, there's some people doing, like, social justice or racial justice work, but I work at Google, right? And so that's just not there are lots of different ways to engage in that work, and whether it's like simply having a conversation with your family that might not otherwise would have happened around Baltimore, or if you're, like, you're in the picket line in the streets. I think that this work can be done in all different sorts of ways, and it has to, and I think it's going to have to take all of us.
So when generationally we see favorable improvements, the challenges of being a Black male seem to be unchanged. How do we, as fathers, brothers, uncles, etc., educate our sons about the world without burdening them with the past, so they feel empowered to make a difference?
Yeah, clearly that's been a question I've been thinking about and grappling with, in some way my entire life, but certainly very, very acutely over the course of the past year. I think I don't have a son, and if I'm fortunate enough to have a son one day, I imagine that I will make sure that he knows that he is beautiful and brilliant and capable of doing anything that he wants to do in the world, while also having there be a certain level of reality, not in terms of what he is capable of, but in terms of how other people will perceive him. And to also ensure him that has nothing to do with him, right? That, like, when the way people think about you or dehumanize you or think you are capable of X and not capable of Y, is something that they have to grapple with. And that is not because of anything you have done, and it's not because of who you are. And I think once a young person recognizes that, then it kind of opens up the possibilities of how they imagine themselves navigating the world. Because even for me, right, I'm continuously unlearning so many things that I grew up thinking about my own community and myself, right? About, like, what I was and wasn't capable of in these, like, really, these ways that we wouldn't even necessarily recognize. But, like, I'm spending, my days sitting in libraries for, like, 12 hours a day thinking about this stuff now. And, I'm sitting with some of these thoughts and ideas and recognizing, like, these were, I inundated and was socialized under certain pathologies about, like, what Black masculinity was and what it, how I should be in the world. And so every day I'm trying to, like, step out of myself and make sure that I'm not accepting that. And I want to have a conversation with my sons and my nephews and my cousins, hopefully, sharing with them these things that I am constantly trying to unlearn for myself. Because, again, it's the problem is not the child. The problem is the world that perceives the child in a certain way. And so we don't, again, like my final poem, we don't have to change the kids, we have to change the world. That sounded so cheesy, man.
It was good. Okay.
So, your art is very inspiring. Activism is another tool that can really address a lot of things. But another tool that I don't think a lot of people discuss is policy change from governments and powers that be. But a lot of their decision making happens with vetted data. And a lot of what is fed to them is anecdotal in some sense. Do you feel that companies, large tech companies like Google, have an ethical and moral obligation to take our resources and the power that we have at our disposal and illuminate this ground data, this ground truth, so that policymakers can actually make more informed decisions about what's happening to their people?
I would argue yes. I think the nature of capitalism and the free market, might dictate otherwise. Is it, because the question always becomes like, is this helpful for the bottom line? Like, are we going to make more money? Are we going to expand? Are we going to scale? For me, it's a question of what type of, both individually and on a more macro level, like what type of person and what type of organization do you want to be, right? Just like in terms of core principles, right? Because there's certain ways that companies can and should act if they just want to make a lot of money, right? Like it's very clear that there are certain things you should do and certain things you should not do. But the question is, here at Google and around the world is like, what type of organization and what type of things do we want to represent as an organization to the broader world that might not necessarily be quantifiable, that might not necessarily show up in the quarterly report, that aren't going to be in an Excel sheet, but that are going to have these that are going to send a message to our employees and to the world at large that we are committed to something much bigger than ourselves. Because at the end of the day, if you make a lot of money, you make a lot of money, but then we're all mortal, right? And we're all gonna move on to something else after this life. And for me, it's like, what do I want to leave behind? And how can I leave something behind that represents something that's bigger than myself, both as a person and for the institutions that I represent. And I hope, I don't know too much about the sort of infrastructure of Google in that regard, but I've certainly heard some hopeful anecdotes and some stories that sound like you have a group of people who are at least, committed to thinking about that. I'm here, right? I'm sitting here, so that must mean something.
Well, thank you so much for your time. My phone has been blowing up with questions and people saying that they love the talk and is it being recorded? Is this being captured? Like, we need to have these conversations here. Yeah. So thank you for coming out. We have a little gift for you.
Oh, wow. It's the best gift is a Google gift. Thank you so much.
And for those in the room, Clint has some books for purchase and he'll be signing them outside. So thank you so much, everybody.